Hello and welcome to Americans Learn. My name is Colin, and today I'm watching What Happened to Dead Bodies After Big Battles Throughout History. And this is coming from Today I Found Out. And this is a channel that I haven't done any reacts videos to before, but I am familiar with this channel and with this particular host. I don't recall his name, but he's a good host. I enjoy the channel. I feel like I'd remember if I had seen this one before. But to be completely honest, I'm kind of surprised that I haven't, because this is I've seen a few I've done a few reacts to like the Napoleonic Wars and other like the French Revolution and some other war videos. And one of the things I was wondering was, what did they do with all the dead? I the idea I have from movies and I don't know, I guess movies, television shows maybe is that they after a battle they have a communique, tally the dead and give time to gather the dead and whatnot. But like they must have carted them off elsewhere, right? Or burned them or mass graves somewhere maybe. I have no idea. So hopefully, I assume, with this video, we'll find out. So, with that being said, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll bring up the share screen there. And we'll dive right in.
This episode is made possible by the realistic online game War Thunder. Check out this game through the link in the description below. Go through that link and not only do you support this show, but you get a free premium tank or aircraft and 3 days of premium time as a bonus. Now let's get into it, because today we're answering a viewer question because Jen M asks us, what did they do with all the dead bodies after huge battles in history? Given we know that even Neanderthals would bury their dead, even including objects with the bodies, and various human hunter-gatherer groups likewise used to bury or cremate people at specific sites that functioned as sort of pilgrimage locations for these nomads, it should come as no surprise that since the dawn of known warfare, soldiers have pondered the question of what to do with the bodies of their fallen comrades and enemies. So, what did various groups throughout history actually do about this? A thing we should note before we continue is that there is a definite gap in the memory of history in regards to this one specific matter, and historians only have sparse reports of what happened to the dead of many groups after battles. You might think that solving this problem would simply be a matter of locating famous battle sites and doing some digging to glean a little more insight, but it turns out even this is notoriously difficult, as we're going to get into shortly. That caveat out of the way, on the more definitive front, it's noted that the ancient Greeks made an effort to respect the usual burial customs of the dead after a battle, and collecting the bodies of the fallen was not uncommon. For example, following the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC between Philip II of Macedonia and the Athenians, both sides buried their dead in accordance with the religious customs of the period. This was essentially done both out of respect for the valor of the dead, as well as to appease the gods. With the exception of the Spartans, most ancient Greek societies also made efforts to bury their dead near the city that they hailed from, if time allowed for it. For the sake of practicality, though, mass graves or the like were sometimes utilized instead. In this case, cenotaphs were sometimes erected near their home city in honor of the fallen. As noted, an exception to this are the Spartans, who often buried fallen soldiers on the battlefield where they were killed. Also somewhat unique was that rather than stripping the dead of valuables, as per Spartan tradition, each fallen Spartan was buried with their weapons and armor, and their final resting place was marked by a simple tombstone with their name and an inscription that read, translated, "In war." This was actually a special honor among the Spartans. If one were to die outside of a battle, no such tombstone would be given, and the person would simply be buried in an unmarked grave. The one exception to that was if a woman died in childbirth, then she too would be given the honor.
So that almost makes me like the Spartans. I don't know if anyone else watching here is a fan of Star Trek, but they almost sound very Klingon, and their glory for war, that like only those who die in battle get the honor of having like that tombstone, and those who don't die in battle basically are shamed with an unmarked grave. Like, I don't know, man. That's pretty rough. Let's find out what they did with the
honor of a tombstone. As for the Romans, most soldiers paid a small stipend each month to pay for funerals.
Hang on. What did he say?
the honor of a tombstone grave. The one exception to that was if a woman died in childbirth, then she too would be given the honor of a tombstone. As for the Romans,
oh, so it's like pretty common, like only the soldiers who died in war got the tombstone. Everyone else, if you died not in battle, unmarked grave. Got it.
most soldiers paid a small stipend each month to pay for funeral expenses should they fall in battle. As you might expect from this, the Romans made a conscious effort to recover the bodies of those who died, and if time allowed it, they would bury or cremate them individually. If this wasn't possible, the bodies of soldiers killed in battle would be collected and given a mass cremation or burial. In the event the bodies couldn't be recovered, a cenotaph would be erected to serve as a monument to the individual. The same cannot be said of later wars, where there seems to have been an almost callous disregard for the fallen, and looting of the dead and dying was commonplace.
I also, regarding like the Romans and the Trojans and whatnot, or whoever he was mentioning. Anywho, I wonder how often it was that identifying a soldier was not possible, or how often they would misidentify a fallen soldier. I would imagine that stuff like that would be somewhat commonplace, you know? I don't know.
For example, the Bear Tapestry depicting the Battle of Hastings in 1066 shows soldiers piling up bodies of the dead and stripping them of their valuables. It is believed that following this, bodies were quickly cremated or buried in nearby mass graves. It should be noted here, however, that with the rise of Christianity, mass cremation, at least for a time, seems to have gone the way of the dodo in some regions in favor of mass graves. That said, despite the countless battles that occurred throughout medieval Europe, archaeologists have had an extraordinarily difficult time actually finding any of the bodies. As one paper published in the Journal of Conflict Archaeology, aptly titled "Where Are the Dead of Medieval Battles?" notes, only a handful of mass graves from the late medieval battles in Western Europe have been subject to large-scale excavation to modern standards. The principal reason is that these, and indeed even early modern battlefield graves, have proven extremely elusive, most being identified by chance. Despite a few successes, no combination of prospecting techniques yet provides a consistently effective method of locating such small archaeological features set almost anywhere within a site covering many square kilometers. Looking at much better documented times, looting of the dead was also extraordinarily common during the extremely deadly Napoleonic Wars, with soldiers and locals alike pilfering what they could find after battles. For example, consider this account from a British general following the Battle of Heilsberg in 1807. The grounds between the wood and the Russian batteries, about a quarter of a mile, was a sheet of naked human bodies, which friends and foes had, during the night, mutually stripped, although numbers of these bodies still retained consciousness of their situation. It was a sight that the eye loathed, but from which it could not remove.
Wait, did he just say... Hang on a second.
Numbers of these bodies still retained consciousness of their situation.
Although numbers of these bodies still retained consciousness of their situation, does that mean that like some of these people weren't quite dead yet while they were being stripped of their valuables and whatnot? Oh, man. If that's so, like, why not just put the person out of their misery? At least, you know? And their suffering. Yikes. That is pretty callous. Shit.
It was a sight that the eye loathed, but from which it could not remove. And yes, as noted there, the severely wounded weren't spared the indignity of being robbed of their worldly possessions as they lay dying. And worst of all, this was done not just by their enemies, but by their comrades as well. In fact,
God, see, like, if that was like a common thing, you knew that happened, like, how do you build any trust among your troops? Like, yeah. I don't know. I don't think I could trust anyone if I assumed that if I were laying dying, that instead of helping or putting me out of my misery first, just start robbing me. Jesus.
There are first-hand accounts from wounded soldiers who went on to survive their injuries, detailing the shock of waking up completely naked. Here's a snippet of one such quote from a French soldier called Jean-Baptiste Marbeau. "Stretched on the snow among the piles of dead and dying, unable to move in any way, I gradually and without pain lost consciousness. I judged that my swoon lasted 4 hours, and when I came to my sense, I found myself in this horrible position. I was completely naked, having nothing on but my hat and my right boot. A man of the Transport Corps, thinking me dead, had..."
Why would you leave just one boot? Like, why not just take them both? Why? What?
stripped me in the unusual fashion, and wishing to pull off the only boot that remained, was
Oh,
dragging me by one leg with his foot against my body.
I spoke too soon. He was still in the process of being around. Got it.
The jerk which the man gave me no doubt had restored me to my senses. I succeeded in sitting up and spitting out the clots of blood from my throat. The shock caused by the wind of the ball had produced such an extravasation of blood that my face, shoulders, and chest were black, while the rest of my body was stained red by the blood from my wounds. My hat and my hair were full of blood-stained snow, and as I rolled my haggard eyes, I must have been horrible to see. Anyhow, the transport man looked the other way and went off with my property without my being able to say a single word to him, so utterly prostrate was I. After being stripped of their belongings, the dead, and occasionally still barely living, would often be buried in mass graves, sometimes with bodies from both sides unceremoniously being thrown in. In general, this was either accomplished via the soldiers themselves doing it, or in many cases, members of the local populace being given the gruesome task. However, there are accounts of battles where thousands of bodies were simply left to the elements. For example, General Philippe Ségur states in 1812, "After passing the Kaloga, we marched on, absorbed in thought, when some of us, raising our eyes, uttered a cry of horror. Each one instantly looked about him, and there lay stretched before us a plain trampled, bare, and devastated, all the trees cut down within a few feet of the surface, and farther off craggy hills, the highest of which appeared misshapen and bore a striking resemblance to an extinguished volcano. The ground around us was everywhere covered with fragments of helmets and cuirasses, with broken drums, gun stocks, tatters of uniforms, and standards dyed with blood. On that desolate spot lay 30,000 half-devoured corpses." It should also be noted here that beyond any possessions the bodies may
30,000? And half devoured? I'm trying almost to imagine or think of a scene from a movie that like resembled that. I'm sure I've seen something. Not to the extent of like 30,000. I guess the one that is coming to mind right now is the one from 300, where after they after one of the battles they had, they stacked up all the dead bodies into a wall. Anywho, I'm sure there's more out there, but holy moly, 30,000.
may have had on them before being stripped, the bodies themselves were also of value. For example, human scavengers would come through and rob the dead of their teeth, which would then be used to make dentures. The Napoleonic Wars and the Battle of Waterloo in particular were such a boon for the British dental industry in this way that dentures for a time were known as Waterloo teeth in the UK. Teeth from soldiers were highly sought after, owing to predominantly coming from relatively young men who still had reasonably good teeth. In one account, one Astley Cooper met such a tooth hunter and noted, upon asking this butler, who appeared to be in a state of great destitution, what might be his object, he said it was to get teeth. But when I came to question him upon the means by which he was to obtain these teeth, he said, "Oh, sir, only let there be a battle, and there'll be no want of teeth. I'll draw them as fast as the men are knocked down." Even more grimly, the bones of the dead of some of these battles were later collected and pulverized into fertilizer, which was sold for a modest price across Europe. To quote an article from The Observer written in 1822, "It is now ascertained beyond a doubt by actual experiment on an extensive scale that a dead soldier is a most valuable article of commerce, and for aught be known to the contrary, the good farmers of Yorkshire are, in a great measure, indebted to the bones of their children for their daily bread. It is certainly a singular fact that Great Britain should have sent out such multitudes of soldiers to fight the battles of this country upon the continent of Europe, and should then import their bones as an article of commerce to fatten her soil." The remains of
Huh. I guess the old-timey French would use every part of the soldier. I guess don't let anything go to waste. But man, that is, I don't know. I guess if you're, if you're already giving your life for your country, right? That if you are to die, maybe the idea of having your body return to the earth of your country, the soil of your country, to enrich it so that it you know, for future generations. That's all. That's actually kind of poetic. I do kind of like that idea, but I think that it's the callousness, the coldness of the people that are collecting the bodies for these various purposes. Um, it's a little cold, but hmm. Yeah, mixed feelings on that, I think.
Soldiers were also sometimes collected for use in souvenirs of major battles. For example, poet Eton Stannard Barrett wrote, "I know one honest gentleman who brought home a real Waterloo thumb, nail and all, which he preserves in a bottle of gin." Moving across the pond and to slightly more recent history, markedly more respect was shown for the dead during the American Civil War, where teams of soldiers were tasked with burying the dead of both sides in simple mass graves, with great care being taken to ensure most soldiers received a proper burial. Finally, to discuss World War I and World War II, individual units were largely responsible for the disposal of their own dead, with both Axis and Allied forces having their own rules for how this should be handled. For example, during World War II, Colonel Walter Sonntag of the Wehrmacht's Casualty Office issued a comprehensive guide for how military mass graves should be constructed. Amongst other things, the guidelines indicated that mass graves should be made as close to railway lines as possible and to feature pathways, with the intention being that they'd eventually be turned into war cemeteries. As the war raged on, these guidelines were largely ignored for the sake of practicality. As for the Allies during World War II, burying the dead largely fell to individual soldiers, but some units dedicated to the task did exist. For example, the United States' Quartermaster Graves Registration Service. Tasked with finding and burying every fallen American soldier, the Quartermaster Graves Registration Service have been hailed as some of the unsung heroes of the war due to the general lack of recognition they've received since it ended. Graves registration units were exceptionally committed to their task and undertook their duties with a solemn sense of duty and determination, going to extraordinary lengths to identify bodies and perform the appropriate burial rites depending on the fallen soldier's religious affiliation. When appropriate, GRS units would bury civilian, Allied, and Axis casualties they came across, making sure to bury them in well-marked graves. The location of these graves was then passed on to the relevant authorities. Okay, so war in real life, it has these problems. But you know what doesn't? That would be War Thunder. And oh yes, I just made that segue. War Thunder is a realistic, free-to-play vehicle combat game. It always amazes me when I hear that there are millions of players online playing these games. That is a lot of people, but I can see why. It's amazing what games look like these days, and if it's free-to-play, I mean, why not? In this game, there are over 1,200 historically accurate vehicles, and we at Today found out we like that. We like historical accuracy because, like this video today, we like to dive deep on these subjects. There are tanks, aircraft, ships, incredible vehicles from the 1930s onwards. So this game, it's available on PC, PS4 and Xbox One. So join us on the battlefield for free using the link below. Doing that supports this show, and you also get a free premium tank or aircraft and 3 days of premium time as a bonus just for registering. And thank you for watching.
Alrighty. Well, there we go. Learned something new today. Choking on spit there. Okay, well, yeah. So yeah, learned quite a lot there. I covered like a pretty large swath of history there. So I was not expecting it to go all the way up to World War One. Yeah, interesting. I guess to an extent, like a lot of it makes sense. I think the details of like how quickly people would scavenge these battles and the corpses and whatnot and make use of them pretty quickly. But yeah, I guess it's nice that some people, and as especially as time went on, you know, they were a little bit more respectful with finding the bodies and either getting them home or burying them respectfully. But yeah, that was an interesting video. Let me know in the comments if there's another today I found a video that you'd like me to react to. Hopefully I haven't seen it already. Again, I have seen a few. I am familiar with the channel. It's been a minute since I've watched anything, but yeah. Put it down in the comments if there's one in particular you'd like me to react to, and I'll take a look at it. But yeah. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Subscribing is a good way for me to see your recommendations. So yeah, go ahead and do that. Like and subscribe. You know the deal. And with that being said, thanks for watching, everyone. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.